Well, the Sydney housing market could be getting more affordable. That is, according to the latest quarterly homes monitor by the McKell Institute. The report shows Sydney dwelling completions have skyrocketed in the last quarter, up 35% from the previous period. Joining me now, though, for more on this is Peter Bentley, Executive Director at the McKell Institute. And Peter, thanks so much for being with us today. Just wanted to start by asking you a bit about the survey. I know it specifically relates to the Sydney property market and dwelling completions really there. What can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. Well, Ingrid, we started this survey last year to really ascertain what the property dwelling completions were in the Sydney market. So the Sydney housing market has had a supply issue for quite some time now. And so we wanted to really benchmark what level of houses are actually being completed, not just looking at approvals, what's actually being put into the market. And what we've done is benchmark this against the Metropolitan 2036 strategy, which actually has a regional breakdown for Sydney's 10 different regions. So not only does it allow us to see what Sydney overall is doing, but it allows us to break down the different regions. Now, the good news is in this third quarter, as you mentioned, we've actually seen a real boost. So we've seen the third quarter of 2012 is up 35% from the second quarter and actually up 84% from the first quarter, which is great news. And we're really starting to see a bit of a trend in increased dwelling completions. I guess the note of caution is those figures are still not the sort of levels that we need to see in terms of dwelling completions in order to firstly meet Sydney's housing supply demands right now, but secondly to be producing enough houses to actually put some downward pressure on housing affordability and rental prices. Yeah, and I know we've seen a lot of unevenness in this survey between regions. What drives this lack of consistency? Absolutely. So I guess overall in this recent quarter, the inner city has actually performed very well. So we've seen Sydney CBD and the inner west delivering about 40% above their targets for the quarter, while we've seen the inner north and the southwest of Sydney doing pretty poorly in this quarter. Overall, looking at the last 5 years, what we've seen is built-up areas like the eastern suburbs, the North Shore and the inner west have either met their targets or come very close to. And it's actually been the greenfield areas within Sydney, so the southwest and the northwest growth zones, that have really underperformed in terms of delivery. So I guess that really illustrates to us the challenges in greenfield development and the incentives that we need to be putting in place to be delivering more stock out there.
Yeah, and we'll get to that soon, because there is obviously a clear supply issue in Sydney, but how does that compare to other states in Australia, including Melbourne?
Absolutely, and so this is something we've kind of really singled out, because the Sydney housing market has been falling behind a lot of other capital cities in recent years, but particularly Melbourne. So just to give you one figure that I think really paints the picture, in the last 5 years, Melbourne has approved around 195,000 new residential dwellings. Sydney, in that same period, has only approved around 100,000. So for a city that's larger than Melbourne, we've actually approved almost half the number of new dwellings, and we see that flow through in terms of housing prices. The average house price in Sydney is about 640,000. In Melbourne it's about 520,000. The same with rental costs. So we really have a massive supply issue in Sydney, and hopefully this is a trend that we've started to pick up in terms of completions that we can continue to see increase.
Yeah, perhaps we're living in the wrong state there according to housing affordability. But what are the challenges in really increasing supply in the property market? Key obstacles, I guess, to really boosting developments and boosting this supply lack in Sydney?
Absolutely. So we see a number of factors. There are regulatory and financial factors. We've at the McKell Institute called for the abolition of stamp duty, for example, particularly to kind of really remove some of those upfront costs, and also reductions in developer levies, which are naturally then passed on to first home buyers particularly. But I think one of the main keys really is increasing supply in existing suburbs. And we see from this quarterly tracker the difficulty in delivering new houses in greenfield areas. Now, we absolutely should be doing that. We should be doing more of it. But one of the ways that we can relatively quickly increase supply is by building more in existing suburbs. And that's something we've really been advocating for.
Yeah, because developers are sort of informally known as facing pretty tough red tape when it comes to, they have to wait sometimes a couple of years to even lay a brick. So do you think this is something that needs to be laxed, really, to boost the supply?
Absolutely, and I think the New South Wales government's been making some pretty positive noises in both their plans for a new metro plan and also for their green paper planning reforms, and some of the things they've been looking at: code accessible developments, tick the box. If you comply with previously agreed plans, then you can move straight through the development process. Is very positive because, as you say, there's a major disconnect we see across Australia, but particularly in Sydney, with approvals and completions. And so many people even get to the stage of approval but then can't get through to completion. So it's something we really need to focus on.
Now, as you did mention, Sydney housing affordability, the worst in the world, really, behind what, Hong Kong and
Vancouver. That's right.
Now, we've spoken a bit about supply, but is there more reasoning behind this than just simply a supply versus demand scenario?
Well, there are a whole range of factors, and I think there's certainly financial factors, interest rates, upfront payments. There are a whole range of different things, and what we are seeing are some of those kind of shifting, particularly with interest rates and things like that in recent months and years. But I guess we approach it, and when we compare the Sydney housing market with other markets such as Melbourne and Brisbane that are experiencing similar challenges in terms of financial issues, the key difference is supply, and we're just not building enough, and we're just not supporting enough new homes being built across the city, and naturally, as you're aware, that has a significant impact on housing prices, but then that flows through to rental prices and even to social housing. So this is kind of a major holistic issue that's kind of led to Sydney being the third most unaffordable housing market in the world.
And why don't you think the government's doing more? Because we obviously know we've got an ageing population, a growing population. This is only going to make the supply problem worse in coming years.
Absolutely, and this is one of the real challenges. So previous plans, previous metro plans that we're benchmarking against have called for around 23,000 new homes per year in Sydney. The current New South Wales government set a target of about 25,000. We at the McKell Institute have said we need to actually be aiming for about 35,000 in order to both meet demand, but also, as you say, with new immigrants coming to Sydney and an ageing population. One of the other kind of key factors is right sizing in terms of property, and this is really providing incentives for people to live in the sort of housing that they need. And the example I often give is elderly people that may be living in the family home, a 5 or 6 bedroom family home, and still living there by themselves. And so what we need to do is kind of look at incentives to accommodate them in more appropriate housing, and we've called for an abolition of stamp duty, but also potentially considering land tax, because that provides them an incentive to, in that case, downsize, maybe move to a terrace or an apartment, and that frees that larger home up for families that might want to live in a larger space.
Now, I want to talk a bit about interest rate cuts, because we have seen a lot of cash rate cuts made by the RBA last year, around 80% of which have been passed on by lenders, and that's sort of trying to stimulate, it should be stimulating buyer appetite in new resi property. But there were some comments actually coming from Brett Draffen, his Chief Executive Development at Mirvac, and he was saying, that it's just not stimulating buying. What do you make of that? Yeah,
I agree with him, and it's a real challenge, and I think it's kind of two factors really. Broadly we're seeing Australians increasing their saving rates. A lot of people, particularly those with superannuation, were really burned by the GFC, and as a result, these interest rate cuts, particularly for people with mortgages and potentially people that are looking to get into the market, they're actually saving and they're not jumping out there and getting into it straight away. So while we can be hopeful that we might see some more interest rate cuts this year, and that might provide some small stimulatory effect, in particular in the first home buyers market. But I think overall it's not going to have a significant effect on overall housing prices, and that's why really fundamentally we need to get the supply issue right. And as you rightly say, that a lot of that is about cutting red tape. So you don't think any amount of interest rate cuts will boost the property market? I think it has the potential to have an impact, but I certainly won't be holding my breath that it'll have a significant impact, just from observing last year the way people have been behaving. They've been saving and haven't been going out and spending in retail. We've seen the retailers kind of complaining about not getting the bounce that they hoped from interest rate cuts, and sadly I think the property industry won't see much of a flow through there either.
All right, Peter Bentley from the McKell Institute, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks so much, Ingrid.
Well, it's time for a quick break.